I would hope that the friendship between Calvin and Hobbes is so complex that it would transcend a normal fantasy. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how Bill Watterson described his comic series in 1989, which could arguably be defined as the height of Watterson's traction in the global scene and cartooning world. Watterson was extremely vocal through his comic Calvin and Hobbes, using this vehicle to engage the reader in a range of topics and a plethora of underlying themes. He is a true icon, renowned for his social commentary and a worthy candidate for the nomination into the Cartooning Pop Culture Hall of Fame. Calvin and Hobbes transcends time and has remained a strong influence on the cartooning world. The appeal of Calvin and Hobbes is the clever and unique perspective on life and what it has to offer. More specifically, what you as an individual are able to offer life. It truly is inspirational, giving credence to Calvin and Hobbes' nomination for an esteemed place in the Cartooning Hall of Fame as representative of its adaptability, diversity, and longevity. Calvin and Hobbes, a name that evokes the irreverence of youth and has become synonymous with joie de vivre, as it is timeless, as it is thought-provoking. It truly represents the iconography of modern cartooning, establishing a new era of art style and originality. Watterson brings a light-hearted wisdom and intellect to every image he creates. November 18, 1985. The most iconic, globally recognized and beloved comic strip of all time was published for the very first time. The creator, Bill Watterson, a recluse, a mastermind, a two-time Reuben Award winner, began humbly, but over time grew his creation into a mature strip throughout its decade in the global spotlight. The global spotlight can largely be accredited to the Universal Press Syndicate, who bought the rights to publish Calvin and Hobbes. The publication opened numerous avenues for publicity for Calvin and Hobbes. However, publicity did not mean commercializing the comic strip, as Bill Watterson vowed he would never give his blessing to the commercialization of his brainchild. In my case, I'm convinced that licensing would sell out the soul of Calvin and Hobbes. The world of a comic strip is much more fragile than people realize. Once you've given up its integrity, that's it. I want to make sure that never happens.
He famously never licensed. He refused all licensing opportunities, which would have made him tens, if not hundreds, of millions of dollars. But yeah, Bill Watterson, for him, it really was all about the art. That's all he ever cared about. He never wanted it to be a toy, a merchandising opportunity.
This speaks volumes about his character and subsequently the depth, authenticity, and conviction that the comic strip retained because of who Bill Watterson was. The comic strip's laudable fidelity to originality, consistency, and unwillingness to conform highlights its deservedness for the inclusion in the Cartooning Pop Culture Hall of Fame. It is definitive and undeniable that Calvin and Hobbes were loved by all. The global audience it gathered irrefutably illustrates how relatable it was and how Bill Watterson's pedestrian talk amassed a loyal, global fanbase. I just draw it for myself. I guess I have a gift for expressing pedestrian tastes. It truly is remarkable, an account for his comics branching out from newspapers into books, where a range of exclusive comics were shared. The catalyst for Calvin and Hobbes' popularity and subsequent global reach was not wholly due to the publicity garnered by the Universal Press Syndicate, but ultimately the social, moral, and philosophical convictions portrayed through the comic strip. This zeal and devotion to the characters was, and still is, the reason Calvin and Hobbes' popularity and timelessness is a true example of what a cartooning pop culture Hall of Fame candidate must represent.
But for me, I think Calvin and Hobbes is the greatest comic strip of all time.
Yeah, no.
Calvin and Hobbes is, at times, just gut-bustingly hilarious, and at times completely touching and sweet, too.
Yeah.
And
14 words. Yet they define and encompass the true message contained within Calvin and Hobbes. The magnificent artwork that has graced the cartooning world has become so synonymous with how absurd and unique it remains to this day. Calvin and Hobbes are a particular yet fascinating relationship where the absurdness of Calvin, a 6-year-old boy, through his imagination brings his toy tiger Hobbes to life, is not lost on the creator. The appeal of that is that, the cartoonist is an adult and presumably he has adult comments to make. It's not natural to speak through the mind of a child. That dynamic and interpersonal relationship is easily relatable, tying in the aforementioned pedestrian talk, where Watterson seamlessly relates in unusual friendship to such a wide and diverse audience. The social, moral, and philosophical aspect that is flawlessly woven into the very essence of what Calvin and Hobbes is, enables the cartoon to stand the test of time. The cartoon's immature and/or innocent dynamic is largely brought about by Calvin's age. However, Watterson uses the social construct of imagining friends and completely goes against the grain. Calvin and Hobbes spout and argue extremely philosophical and mentally demanding topics, well beyond the grasp of a 6-year-old, bringing about originality into the comic strip. A recurring overtone is Watterson's and subsequently Calvin's view on life, which is instead of wondering what life has to offer you, see what you have to offer life. It is beautiful, eccentric, and shows how Calvin and Hobbes challenge social practices and inspires their reader to become morally and socially better. This idealistic ideology is largely why Calvin and Hobbes rightfully deserve their place in the cartooning Hall of Fame, as this seemingly innocuous cartoon is able to generate such a profound self-reflective attitude in a global sense. Calvin and Hobbes undeniably had one of the largest impacts on the cartooning world that is still explicitly seen today. It has remained influential, relevant, and has stood the test of time.
Calvin and Hobbes is mostly very timeless.
It is as simple as that, ladies and gentlemen. As simple as that. Calvin and Hobbes have become an icon in the cartooning world, from its art style to its original, organic, and unique viewpoint of the young adolescent and his toy tiger, imparting convictions to improving yourself morally, socially, and philosophically. It truly is one of a kind and deserves the first official nomination for the highly esteemed Cartooning Pop Culture Hall of Fame. Calvin and Hobbes avoided political commentary, largely attributed to Watterson's former career of having to slave over creating political cartoons. He despised this job, and rightfully so. His mind, his imagination, his willingness to go against the grain and question everything was much better served in his creation of Calvin and Hobbes, and is why it remains such a successful and enduring cartoon series. The longevity of the cartoon, the influence of the cartoon, and the absurdness of the cartoon is a key factor in why it continues to delight and entertain readers to this day.
And it's been a pleasure for me to share it with my 3-year-old.
What's impressive is that even his rivals, his competitors, cannot deny his talents and how much he has influenced the cartooning world and his influence on the cartooning world, inspiring young cartoonists to develop original art styles and their self-identity within their cartoon. It is irrefutable that Calvin and Hobbes truly is one of a kind and truly is timeless. It does not age. It does not become less relevant. It is and always will strike a chord in any reader. Calvin and Hobbes challenge our preconceptions and alights on a truly unique vehicle to ponder such social, moral, and philosophical discourse through the eyes of a 6-year-old and his toy tiger. It is an evocative friendship that strives to illuminate our place in society, and is this tenacity to define what binds us that drives this nomination into the Cartooning Pop Culture Hall of Fame. Calvin and Hobbes personifies the global presence and profound impact cartoons can have on such a large scale. Through its convictions and confidence, Calvin and Hobbes challenge moral, societal, and philosophical views whilst remaining entertaining and comedic. Watterson's relationship with the comic began humbly, but with time and an increase in popularity, his comics grew in maturity and brilliance. Which is why Calvin and Hobbes deserves to stand proud, to stand tall, to stand as a symbol of youthful wisdom and hope in the pop culture cartooning hall of fame, because it reminds us to all live better.